We're going to hear a fine concert tonight. The consort, as David said, is going to perform music from the French court in the last half of the 16th century, and we'll see dances from the same period performed by dancers of the School of Atelier Ballet. And it really is lovely. I had the chance to see it yesterday, and I know you're going to enjoy it. We'll be at the court of Catherine de' Medici, the Italian Queen of France. Catherine lived a precarious life in precarious times, but she was also a strong, intelligent woman, and she never ceased working to create balance and harmony in the midst of the chaos and violence through which she lived. Because she was the strong mother of weak kings, Catherine's policies and her taste defined the French court, especially for the 30 years from 1559, when her husband Henry II died, until her own death in 1589. Much of what we know about Catherine comes to us from the propaganda of her Protestant enemies, and it's not very positive, to say the least. And I'm hoping that I can take a slightly different approach and look more deeply and appreciate her skillful diplomacy, her quest for religious tolerance, and especially in the context of this concert, her patronage of the arts. Her Italian education, her Medici family heritage, and her Italian connections played a role in her patronage, but she worked just as closely with French artists, and the results, I would say, are thoroughly French. Catherine firmly believed that by observing and participating in all the arts, her subjects would become more humane and more inclined to seek peace. And I'm sure that's why we're all here tonight. Catherine's life was precarious from the beginning. She was the daughter of a Medici duke and a French noblewoman, so she was actually half French, but she was orphaned within a month of her birth. She was cared for by relatives. She received a fine humanist education, but it was amidst political strife and warfare in Florence. In 1533, at the age of 14, both she and her groom were 14, Catherine was married to Henry of Orleans, the second son of Francis I of France. The marriage was part of a treaty and an exchange of territory between the French king and Catherine's uncle, Pope Clement VII. You can see Pope Clement there marrying the couple. And over on the left is Catherine's father-in-law, Francis I. But the Pope died soon after the wedding. The treaty collapsed. The King Francis' Italian territories and Catherine's dowry never materialized. This is actually a fairly idealized image of Catherine's marriage, and it was painted nearly 70 years later. Actually, she wasn't quite as classically beautiful as the image suggests. Those are pictures of Catherine, one at 17, about 3 years after her wedding, and then the other at the age of 21. So she's a strong and charming face, a very interesting woman. To add to the difficulty of her position after her marriage, Catherine's new husband already had a mistress, Diane de Poitiers, and any of you who visited the chateaux of the Loire will have seen Diane de Poitiers' mark throughout. And Diane would occupy a strong position throughout Henry's life. Then, another disaster, Henry's popular brother, the Dauphin Francis, died in 1536, and Catherine's husband became heir to the throne. So Catherine really was in serious danger of being repudiated by her husband and her father-in-law. She was obviously not sufficiently noble to be the Queen of France, and she brought no useful alliances, and she brought no money or territory either. Catherine redeemed herself by charming her father-in-law with her intelligence and taste, and eventually by bearing 10 children. 7 of the children survived to adulthood, 3 girls and 4 boys. These are Catherine and Henry's daughters. Elizabeth, or their daughter Elizabeth, became the Queen of Spain, married Philip II. Their daughter Claude married the Duke of Lorraine, and Marguerite, the famous Reine Margot, married Henry of Navarre, the future Henry IV of France. But that's another story altogether. These are the 4 of Catherine's sons who lived to adulthood, and 3 of them became kings of France. Francis II reigned for just a year, Charles IX for 14 years, and Henry III for 15 years. Catherine's youngest son died before inheriting the throne. And this evening's performance actually reflects the courts of Catherine's second and third sons, mainly Charles IX and Henry III. Catherine's husband, Henry II, became king in 1547. While she was overshadowed by her husband's mistress, Catherine quietly but firmly established herself as someone who cared for her children, gave sound advice to her husband, and contributed to court life by sponsoring artists, poets, and musicians. But this relatively tranquil period really lasted only about a dozen years. Henry II, her husband, died as the result of a jousting accident, and ironically it was a jousting accident to celebrate a peace treaty and a marriage. In this image, Henry II lies on his deathbed, and the doctors around the table are trying to find a remedy for his wound, and Catherine, already in black, is standing beside his bed. Henry II's premature death brought France into chaos. As I mentioned earlier, Henry's heirs, the last three Valois kings, that were young, sickly, and weak. They really were problematic. As we've seen, Francis II reigned for only 1 year, and neither Charles IX nor Henry III was politically astute or militarily strong. At the same time, and because of the weakness of the heirs to the throne, dynastic and religious tensions that had been kept under control by Henry II broke out into violence. Between Henry's death and Catherine's own death in 1589, France was never comfortably at peace. There was violence that broke out into 8 full-blown religious wars. Religious and dynastic loyalties and tensions were very complex, but they centered around the rivalry between the powerful Catholic Guise family and the equally powerful Protestant or Huguenot Bourbon family. As well as the internal conflict, France was also vulnerable to foreign attacks, especially from Spain and the Holy Roman Empire, and the country's treasury was virtually empty. So Catherine's position could hardly have been more precarious. Yet, even though she had no real claim to power, she managed to act as regent and advisor to all 3 of her sons, and most of the business of government fell to her. In fact, it's unlikely that any of her sons would have survived at all without Catherine's efforts. Catherine worked tirelessly to try and maintain some kind of balance in the midst of all this chaos. This image illustrates one of her projects, the Colloquy of Poissy, where she brought Protestant and Catholic theologians together in a vain attempt to find common ground. And I think you can identify by the color of their robes, the Protestants in their black and the Catholics in their red. It was a vain attempt to find common ground. Catherine, though, was convinced that if people of goodwill got together and talked, they would be able to work out their differences. She did put her diplomatic skills to good use at least some of the time, though, and the edicts, she put several edicts in place to try to provide a framework within which Catholics and Protestants could live peacefully side by side. And these edicts did create some periods of relative peace, and arguably also her edicts, the edicts of pacification that Catherine promulgated, formed the basis for the Edict of Nantes, which would be a groundbreaking edict of toleration put in place by her son's successor, Henry IV, and ending the wars of religion. Still, as I said, Catherine's reputation comes to us in large measure through Huguenot propaganda, and especially as the perpetrator of the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, which she did authorize and which was horrible, though much of the slaughter was not authorized by Catherine. Catherine's patronage of the arts was just important as her other strategies as she attempted to bring some order to the chaos in France. As I said before, Catherine's humanist education had taught her that the arts could strengthen a ruler's reputation and convince others that the dynasty was united and strong. Catherine's own portrait as a widow, which you see there, painted by François Clouet, was frequently copied and widely distributed. It's meant to underline her seriousness and strength, which I think you'll agree it does, and to indicate that there was no frivolity or feminine weakness in her. And again, I think you'll agree. Paintings of members of the Valois family were also distributed widely to reinforce the image of a strong, united dynasty. Patronage was particularly important to Catherine because of the belief that she shared with her artists and musicians that spectators and participants could be transformed by harmonious, integrated beauty and performance, and would emerge more civilized, more humane, more aware of the need to overcome chaos and to live together in harmony. And that's symbolized by this image of the 9 muses dancing with Apollo. For according to Neoplatonic thought, the same mathematical proportions which create harmony in music also apply to poetry and dance, to architecture and gardens, to painting and sculpture. All these arts echo divine harmony, the music of the spheres, and all contribute to peace and good government in the world. Catherine's architectural projects were built with these goals, like the geometric gardens and the maze she had built at Chenonceau, and the gallery that she had built over the river to accommodate court performances and ballets. Instrumental music and song also expressed the universal harmony Catherine sought. There was always music at court, at major celebrations, and in intimate settings, as this image, somewhat idealized, of the bath suggests. Poets and composers vied with each other to write in praise of the Valois family, and you're going to hear a wonderful selection of songs in praise of the Valois family and from the favorite poets and composers of Catherine, Charles IX, and Henry III. Catherine's favorite poet was Pierre de Ronsard, one of France's greatest poets. Ronsard wrote long, epic-like poems in support of Catherine's position during the wars of religion, as well as lighter poetry to be set to music for court entertainments, and you'll hear 2 of those. Catherine also admired the poets of her native Italy, especially Ludovico Ariosto, and settings of his poems are also featured in today's program. Charles IX's favorite composers were Orlando de Lasso and Guillaume Costelet, who was also his court musician, his organist, and his valet de chambre. During the reign of Henry III, an Academy of Music and Poetry was founded to promote the ideal of universal harmony through the arts. And the members of that academy wanted to recreate the rhythms of Greek and Latin poetry in French and in musical settings. They created what they called vers mesurés à l'antique, and you will hear examples from the poets Jean-Antoine de Baïf and Jean de Sponde in collaboration with composers, especially Claude Duljeune. And another genre that became popular at the court was the voix de ville, also represented tonight. And the members of the Valois court were renowned for their love of dancing and for their dancing skill. In fact, it's said that Henry III often spent so much time perfecting his dance steps that he had no time to see ambassadors or deal with the business of the country. And as I said, Catherine de' Medici truly believed that performance influenced reality. For example, she would often stage a kiss of peace in situations of tension. One time, she got the Catholic Duke of Guise and the Huguenot Antoine de Bourbon, brought them to court and insisted that they publicly exchange a kiss of peace as a sign of their unity in the service of the king. And another time, she made her youngest son, the Duke of Alençon, exchange the kiss of peace with his older brother, King Henry III, after Alençon had admitted to plotting against the king. And Catherine staged Concord on a huge scale when she brought together her entire court, including the leaders of all the warring factions and assorted ambassadors, to celebrate a wedding or a coronation or the stops along a massive procession that she arranged through France for her son Charles IX. After one of those festivities, Catherine wrote delightedly to her daughter, "Et tout danse, Huguenots et papistes, ensemble, si bien." And everyone was dancing together so nicely, Huguenots and papists. Catherine's magnificences, as they were called, involved poets, actors, musicians, stage and costume designers, and dancers. Some of these were professionals, but all the central roles were played by members of the court, and many of the dancers and singers were also courtiers. Catherine collaborated in creating these entertainments. She was a producer and also the principal spectator. The magnificence went on for several days, up to a week, and at enormous cost. I couldn't even begin to describe the costumes, the stage sets, the stage machinery, all the instruments and personnel that were involved, and all were devoted to Catherine's goals of demonstrating and creating harmony and peace under her son's roles. The performances were ephemeral, but there are some printed accounts and a set of tapestries based on them. It's difficult to see the detail in the tapestries, but they give some idea of the splendor of the events. This image shows the whole court setting out on this progress, this procession through France that Catherine arranged for her son. It took over 2 years, and he went around to the major cities and towns to meet his people. You can just about see the immense train of carriages, horses, and baggage carts. And of course, there were elaborate performances that took place before the progress started and at each step along the way. For the performance of the event, Catherine herself sponsored at Fontainebleau before this great progress started. She chose a play called La Belle Geneviève. And the play is actually based on the same episode from the Orlando Furioso as Handel used for his opera Ariodante. And some of you may have seen Ariodante just recently with the COC. Catherine used the name of the female heroine as her title. Handel used the name of the hero. This La Belle Geneviève was the first known adaptation of a part of the Orlando Furioso in France. There would be many, many more that would follow. And one of the songs that Ronsard wrote for the event celebrates the power of love as the force that brought order to the original chaos at the beginning of creation. And one example of a celebration in Bayonne, Catherine met her daughter Elizabeth, who was the Queen of Spain, and Charles IX met with her, and other Spanish nobles were there. And the festivities there were designed to impress the Spanish with France's prosperity and unity. They met in Bayonne, and this particular scene involved the participants traveling by boat on the river, and among other things, they observed a giant artificial whale that spouted red wine when it was struck with a sword. In the summer of 1572, for the wedding of Catherine's daughter Marguerite de Valois with the Huguenot leader Henry of Navarre, Catherine staged a ballet that seems to me to have been intended as a performance of peace, but has bitterly ironic overtones. This is the plot of the ballet. All the leading noblemen took part. The Catholics, led by King Charles IX and his brothers, defended a paradise located on one side of the stage, and they were defending it against Henry of Navarre and his Protestant friends. The Protestants were defeated and driven into a hellmouth on the other side of the stage. Later, the Protestants were generously liberated by the Catholics. One wonders how the Protestant wedding guests felt about their role. Another splendid celebration took place in the gardens of the Tuileries Palace. Charles IX was king when his brother Henry was elected king of Poland, and the Polish envoys came to escort him to his new country. And in this ballet, nymphs representing the provinces of France danced a harmonious dance to represent the richness and the concord of France. And you can see Catherine in black in the center as a spectator, and the little detail showing musicians in an elaborate stage. There were huge festivities to celebrate the marriage of one of Henry III's favorites, the Duc de Joyeuse. And that's a scene of a dance, a ball, and also a detail showing some musicians. The highlight was the Ballet Comique de la Reine. This work has been much discussed and admired over the years. It's brilliantly innovative and a precursor both for the ballet and for the opera in France. The printed account explains in detail the seating and the stage set. You can see the audience in tiers up above the king at the front, in center, the audience in balconies, and the very, very top were the musicians, and they were just under the ceiling. The ceiling was golden. They referred to it as the golden vault. So the music would come down from above and also be performed on the main stage. For this concert, you'll be hearing the songs of the mermaids and the tritons. And that's what they looked like. Apparently, the mermaids did indeed have two tails, all covered in gold and copper scales. And the mermaids were led by Henry III's wife, Queen Louise, and her court ladies. They danced the roles of the mermaids. And the tritons are presented as musicians. I think it must have been difficult to balance the instruments and the tridents. I think they were probably not playing. This is just some of the music that the mermaids sing that you'll be hearing this evening. Balthazar Beaujoyeux created the ballet, and he shared Catherine's goals and also the ideas of the members of that Academy of Music and Poetry that I was telling you about. He wanted to create a perfect synthesis of all the arts, settings, theatrical machines, costumes, music, poetry, and dance. Like Catherine, he believed that the harmonious combination of all these elements would have positive moral effects on the audience, and his complex geometric choreography was based on Neoplatonic thought. And this image gives a faint impression of Beaujoyeux's choreography for the scene, featuring the mermaids and the tritons. And as you can see, all the action is centered in the gaze of the king, who is seated in the front. This ballet told the story of the evil magician Circe, who has enchanted Ulysses' men and turned them into animals. The wicked Circe can be defeated by the combined forces of artistic creation, perfect mathematics, and the king. Let's leave Catherine de Medici wearing her signature black, watching one of her magnificences. The Protestant poet Agrippa d'Aubigné compared Catherine and her sons to Nero fiddling while Rome burned. But she certainly left a wonderful artistic and musical legacy, some of it ephemeral, happily, some that we can enjoy this evening. Thank you.